The Make It Make Sense with Tomee Sojourner-Campbell podcast explores real-world work and social issues, the power of storytelling, and offers listeners practical insights and actionable solutions, with guests from across the globe sharing their knowledge and their creative practices. So welcome back to Make It Make Sense with Tomee Sojourner-Campbell. My guest today is Darlene Jackson, also known as DJ Lady D. She is a trailblazer in Chicago house music, community leader, and a writer from Chicago. She started professionally DJing in 1995. I went to your online bio.
Right.
You run your own label and marketing group, Delectable Music.
Yes.
And you performed globally around the world and in different spaces. And most recently in 2025, I saw that you were featured in a documentary, Move Your Body, The Birth of House Music,
Yeah.
that featured at Sundance Film Festival. I want to thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to our conversation today.
Thank you so much for having me, Tommy. It's really great to talk about house music and to, enlighten your listeners with whatever I can offer. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. So I actually just wanted us to sort of ground in the power of house music.
Mm.
I know throughout my lifetime, I've found house music is not only sort of a magical experience when you're in a club dancing with hundreds of people listening to a fantastic DJ, but it's also so transformative in terms of the power of storytelling, moving us from where we are into different realities and creating sort of a different opportunity of hope. And in many cases, as we are moving through this space right now, there's so many challenges in the world. It'll be really nice to talk about what house music can do, what it has done, and what it can do from your perspective. So, from your perspective, then, what are four key elements that make Chicago style house music socially transformative?
Okay. If I were going to list them, um, well, okay, let me start a little bit with the foundation of why house music exploded in the first place, because there were a lot of things that happened at once that created this perfect storm. And so I think some of the elements come from that. So from the basis of it, you've got this like children of the civil rights movement. These are kids whose parents told them that you can be anything, do anything. And so when you get to the late 70s and the early 80s, many of them are, young teenagers, but understand the power of collective movement. So they're
Yes.
forming these small crews. They have, by that time, our parents are doing pretty well. They're like usually, double income, homeowners who value education, and so these kids are smart, they're mobile, they have disposable income, and a very fierce entrepreneurial spirit. So they took these attitudes and went around and began placemaking. So they might go to a soul food restaurant and say, "Hey, you close at 10. What if we bring in our, equipment and throw a party? We'll give you some of the proceeds. You've got an extra source of revenue. You don't have to do anything. Just open your doors." And people bought into it. They did that at Catholic high schools. They did that at smaller restaurants. And they found some of their own spaces to buy and co-opt, like lofts and abandoned warehouses. And so they began to, just be young business people. That's one thing. The second thing was that you've got the I would say democratization of production. So pieces like the Roland 303 and these drum machines that they began to make that were supposed to be just accompaniment for live musicians, they took those small, affordable pieces and put them in their bedrooms and their basements and kind of linked them together with a keyboard. And they began the process of trying to create their own music. So they instantly became music producers, and they were they weren't beholden to the studio system, which said you had to rent out an expensive recording studio, make, bring in all these musicians, spend a ton of money to make a song. And so they took their inspiration from disco songs and things like that, and then they disrupted it. They innovated on top of it. So they were innovative and in these production techniques, but these affordable pieces made that possible. And then you've got the Warehouse and Frankie Knuckles. Frankie Knuckles bringing some of that New York culture to the space here in Chicago gave people a bird's eye view into what it's like to liberate yourself within a space of sound and community. And so the, LGBTQIA plus community who was so used to having to hide themselves,
Yeah.
but they were creating these very brave and safe spaces for themselves in which to commune. And so the straight kids who got to witness that, they took that culture and the ethos behind the culture of inclusivity, and they put that into expanding what house music could be in these other spaces that they were placemaking at around Chicago. And then you've got the Hot Mix Five. So when music gets on the radio and it's going out to 2 million people every weekend since 1981, and then people are recording those things, and those recordings are becoming your first distribution channels for house music. People are taking those tapes down south with them when they go to visit their cousins, and then the GIs who are going overseas and get, because they've got to go off, for their particular orders. They're taking those tapes with them, and they're taking them, and so and finally, I would say the last thing is when house music first gets pressed up on vinyl in 84. And once it gets on vinyl, it becomes an export. And so those things, those records being able to go overseas, and then you've got people who are, I guess, I guess I would say opportunistic, taking advantage of the fact that, here are these kids, they're finally getting their music pressed up. This is like music they've never heard before. And you're getting people making deals with some of these record labels who are here and very established in Chicago, like Trax Records and DJ International. And then, uh, you know, the kids may have been getting taken advantage of. They're signing papers they
Mhm.
don't know about. They're 16,
Mhm.
17 years old. They think it's just great to have a record, but they don't know that their records are now becoming number one hits overseas
Okay.
until they start calling and say, "Hey, can you be on top of the pops?" They don't even know what's happening, but it did assist in in sort of the distribution network going now from, cassettes and being like, regional and national to now it's overseas and it starts to spread everywhere. So all of those things happen, right? Now, how do why does it become socially transformative, or how do you continue to make house music socially transformative? I think it's those same things, like this inclusivity piece about the dance floor. It comes from Black and brown and queer communities. Okay. So if you're in mainstream places and you're denied visibility or denied safety, then you're going to go find places to create that yourself. So that made, the world more socially transformative, because once they took the lid off of that, people were like, wow, this is amazing. We didn't even know it existed. Well, it does. And everybody could be a part of it. You just have to be cool. You know what I mean? You gotta be cool.
Yes,
Like, and not cool in the sense of like you cool. No, like you gotta understand what inclusivity is all about.
exactly.
Yeah. And so I would say that that's probably number one. And then the music itself, repetitive. Repetition is ritual. And when you get people hearing those beats, and the rhythm is it's pulling you out of your individualism, and it's making you look around and seeing everybody doing that thing, right?
Yeah.
So we're on one pulse. We're all on one rhythm. That repetition makes, you just connect. At some point you give up the ghost, right? You're like, I'm in it and we're all in it. And you look around and you're like, okay, we're all taking part in this. So it gives you this sort of collective cohesion. It's going to just connect you. And so, I would say that's two. And then, okay, democracy. I said this in the Move Your Body, that disco is the first time you start to see democracy on the dance floor, where
Yes.
everybody of every, walk of life can get in on this action if you want to, right? There's no hierarchy. I mean, now we kind of look at, the DJ as God, but then it was just the DJ was the facilitator, right? And it was this participatory thing. Like nobody, people came to dance with each other and to the music. And so both things were important. And this call and response, a lot of the music from that time was kind of call and response. And it's an energy exchange. And so everybody taking part in that democratic process. And so there's no hierarchy. It's all decentralized. Everybody plays a part. The dancers are important. The sound system's important. The maestro is important. But the music on the platter, right? The people that have to make the music, that's equally as important. So all of those things come together to kind of create this participatory experience that is very democratic. Um, and then I would say the other thing, well, socially, because a lot of early house is borrowed from music that was popular or somewhat popular, and then it was transformed. So when they start making disco edits, right, and they're
Yeah.
extending these breaks, and they keep telling the best parts of the story, and so it does become sort of mesmerizing. It can put you in a trance, and so it allows for this, sonic exploration, this sort of, you know, cultural memory, right? Because Lolita Holloway's voice, or First Choice's voice, from their hits earlier on. But now you're hearing it in a new way. It's all chopped up, and it just gets in you. It continues to get in you. So yeah, that can lead to a certain state of euphoria. So yeah, so I think that's the way that I would say. I'm sorry I had to give you all that background and
No, it's amazing because
okay.
it's necessary. Because when I think about house music, and I think about when I was a teenager living overseas, I was born in Ottawa, and moved all over the world. I lived in Malaysia, and I remember the beginnings. Like, I can date myself. It was many years ago, right? I was a product. I
But I
grew
just
up in the
had a birthday.
70s.
You're fine.
I grew up in the 70s and 80s and 90s, and I just remember being in boarding school, 11 years old, in Scotland.
Oh wow, you really
Being
all over.
Yeah, and being on a bus, on a school bus going to a field hockey trip. 11, I was the tallest person in my class, and I had my cassette because every day I had listened to Top of the Pops on the radio, and I would record it and have my little Walkman or my stereo system. And for me, the moments that were transformative is that despite what was going on in my reality of being this young child thrown into this boarding school, I connected with the DJ. I connected with the music and the way the breaks, and I'd be dancing and moving my body and just being in a moment.
That's
And
awesome.
and so when you talk about, the curation of music and the cultural memory, because although I didn't live in Ottawa or in Canada or North America at the time, I was still listening to Dr. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream. I
Mm,
was still listening to the cultural relevance and the cultural meanings, and then taking it to Scotland or taking it to the United Arab Emirates or Penang, wherever I lived, and
mhm.
having those kids listen to that music. And we didn't necessarily speak the same language
Yeah,
or have the same reality, but when that beat came on, we were ready, right? And so that's kind of international, global, aspect of house music, and so really thinking about that transformation
Yeah.
and what you were saying about how you think about the beginnings in a historical context. And I think that is so important because oftentimes in mainstream spaces, when people talk about house music, it gets lost as who started it,
Hmm.
where are the roots? Because certainly now, as we see in in different parts of the world where roots are being uplifted and erasure is happening for those of us who are from historically marginalized communities, including myself, who is a member of the 2S LGBTQ plus communities, where we have to reinsert our stories all the time, right?
Yeah.
At every point in every moment. And so for me, hearing you talk about the creation of space where none existed,
Hmm.
and then the idea of entrepreneurship, building a community, building wealth, building community-based wealth,
Yeah.
so
Right.
that our stories wouldn't be lost. And so, from there, I'm sort of transported into my next sort of question or thought as it relates to what you've shared so far is when we think about what's happening now in Canada and the US and globally, and that we're living through this sort of generational social, cultural, economic challenges.
Oh.
If you were to imagine or reimagine spaces where folks like myself, folks who are listening across the sort of the globe to this particular podcast, who are from historically marginalized communities, as we navigate, live, love, and thrive, what parts of house music would you weave together to create those spaces at this time?
Mm. Mm. Well, well, um, so I feel like, many of us danced Saturday nights into Sunday morning. Some of us got up to church, some of us considered that night our church. Okay, so
Yeah, yeah,
I would say like this model of the club as a sanctuary. Um, maybe you want to keep that present and in the forefront, that it's not all about having a good time. For some people, this is the first opportunity that they get in a week after working hard, after feeling disrespected, after going through whatever it is they have to go through to get to the club that night, that this is the place where they come to let it all go, right?
mhm,
And so that it, like, again, you give up the ghost, right? Like, you can dance yourself out of your constrictions, like Parliament said, like
yeah,
you can elevate yourself, you can lose yourself, find yourself again. And all of that is happening, right? On an individual level. But you're there the DJ, I mean, is at least to take care of all of those folks that come through the door seeking that whatever it is, retribution, restitution, reconciliation, all of those things. And so relax, relate, release, as Whitley would say, you've got to give them that space to do that. And so a lot of it is, just remembering your audience and giving them that sanctuary, making it a sacred space. It requires, I think, some storytelling. You need,
yes,
yes, the
yeah,
power of the word. Okay, like, and even for, audiences where it's like, maybe it's techno and they just want beats, pounding beats or whatever. I think, even like, I'm trying not to think about European techno, think about high tech soul like Detroit, right? Like,
yeah,
they still gonna have some words in there, right? So you got to tell some stories. You gotta, even if you're on the pulpit, you gotta find a way to weave in something relatable, word, sound, power, right? So
yes,
give me something to cling on to. And so that you don't feel like you're so othered, you don't feel like you're just in the margins, that really, it's all there for you. So creating these environments that where you're leading with trust because you prioritize safety, you prioritized celebration, not just commodification. Um, and I just think about those days. It used to be a black room with a red light. It doesn't have to be all this LED stuff, like let's take it back to the basics and let people get lost in the music and let people dance to their sweaty mess. And
Yes.
and everybody in the room is there, not just a few people who are brave enough to do it, but setting up a environment where everybody feels cool enough to do that, like they trust enough to do that, that they're not being looked at. They're not being stared at. It's not going to end up on social media somewhere. So that piece of safety, you
Yeah.
know, um, you know, this is about being able to get real physical with it, make them ugly faces, sweat your perm out, and and you have to be willing to do that, um, you know.
I remember I used to have braids and I would always come home a braid short when I got into that music and just moving and it's funny because when I was also dancing I used to work in a nightclub. I remember when I messaged you the last time we spoke I was a nightclub bouncer at a rave club that played house music, and I had the privilege of seeing Sonique when she was just coming out with her smash hit. Came in, yeah,
Yeah,
right?
it feels so good. Oh, what takes me high. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, being there and watching her DJ. And she was one at the night time she was there, she was the only DJ on the mic. So she sang live over her music.
love it.
And this was in the late 90s.
Woo!
So, it was one of those things. And I didn't know as a 20 something year old bouncing in a club, being the only Black queer person in that nightclub, and then surrounded by a sea of white appearing folks, that in that moment with like thinking about what Sonique, I can't even imagine the barriers that she had to go through to bring her music and her sound to a club at 2 o'clock in the morning in Ottawa, where she was not the sort of the one on the that was built the highest built
Mm,
individual in the room. And I just remember the movement of the people. Like she was her craft was incredible. So
mm,
you'd watch people, when as you do as a DJ, an extraordinary DJ, you watch the energy go down and you're waiting for people. And it's I see it as an orchestra, and you are the conductor,
mm,
and everybody else in there is a part of your orchestra. And then so you watch the mood go up and down and the energy exchange. And it doesn't matter whether you can dance or not dance. And so for me, watching whether it's watching Sonique and yourself, is that the coming together of a knowing of a being who walks in the world, moves in the world with a sense of history and purpose.
yeah,
And one of the things that I wanted to connect with you on in terms of thinking about, the curation of house music and the lyrics, when you're telling the story or
yeah.
stories that you want people to connect with in that moment, are you curating a list of lyrics and connecting the lyrics to a story that you want to tell? Or are you thinking also about your audience and the stories that they might want to share through their bodies and through their movement?
Hmm. Well, I mean, I think of myself as the type of DJ that tells stories when they're playing, not just one continual story, right? So I might, start with one story and sort of conclude that story, a few tracks in, and it takes me to another place where I feel like, oh, there is another story here. So maybe it's like more like an anthology. It's a book of short stories. And I was listening to my set for book club radio, and sometimes I don't see it until I come back to hear it, right? Like I don't know that I'm doing it when I'm doing it, but when I listen to it, I'm like, oh yeah, there's so much meaning in that. When I said, I play like um a tribal version of Dindada, right? That leads into La India, love and happiness, river ocean, that leads into this is America. I was like, and really I was saying at that point, like, America is indigenous, right?
Yes.
And so I wanted to connect that, for people in that moment. And people got really like they were, first of all, those beats are very tribal. And so I'm pounding you over the head with it. But then, I'm gonna bring in like, all of this sort of lyricism about, getting your money, black man, and and this is America, and don't be sleeping, don't get sleepy here, like
Hmm.
understand that, this indigenous place and us being so nice and giving and forgiving has gotten us to a place where people are comfortable disrespecting us. And like, the dance floor is a political place in a lot of ways. I want people to understand that. We're
Yeah.
we're like again, we're not just there having a good time. We are working through stuff. And so I would say that, I think about, things like, my Naked Kaleidoscope CD. Now that was a story about love. And that was a story about, like what it takes to sustain a relationship. People meet and there's this instant attraction. And then there's this, sort of like you just have this honeymoon and then, what do you do when it gets tough? And I think that, when you're on the dance floor, it is about creating some tension and getting it up to here and then releasing that and letting
Yes.
people just really go. And
Yeah.
then, and unbeknownst to them, there's more tension coming up. So peaks and valleys and driving it home to a place where now you're completely released, but it should get you to a place where you have forgotten all of yourself and you get to have that joy. I mean, it is an unspeakable joy, as the word says. It's radical joy because there's a lot of stuff going on in the world, but they cannot take your joy, and
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
unless you give it to them. So there's a lot of stuff, you're trying to keep it structured but a little fluid at the same time. Um, yeah, you want people to feel rooted and knowing that if you can create a space of trust like this, where for 6 or 7 or 8 hours, y'all can all be in one place, no violence, no, you stepped on my foot, no, you banged into me. Everybody's just, moving. And even if you do bump somebody, everybody, both people be like, sorry, at the same
Yeah.
time, because there is it does give you hope for peace, right? You're like, yeah, we can do this, we can work together in so many other ways, but you have to be willing to come to the table as you are. So I hope that it sort of answers that.
It
That storytelling piece is huge. You have to have some sort of storytelling. And I think, because house borrows from gospel. House borrows from soul music, rhythm and blues, disco, all of those black roots of music, and then creates its own stories about, the things that we deal with in a modern age in a modern way. I think that, it still is that sort of groundedness of pulling from the past, the memory work of, what we know, to create, our sense of being based on some real shared values and sort of a moral compass, right? That I don't want to say you have to be religious because I'm certainly not religious, but it is a spiritual experience.
it is, and it's a place of, as you were saying about building that trust, building those connections, and you might leave that space and not necessarily see that person again, but know that they had an impact on you in that moment,
Mhm.
because then you go back into quote unquote your real everyday life, and that
Yeah,
song and that beat and that energy may carry you forward through a week, 10
yeah,
weeks, a
yeah,
lifetime, right?
right.
And then as you were saying, when you kind of move and see different people, certainly like for when I think about house music in the different genres, I know I'm talking about house music very generally, but the way it can transform our stories, where we can be in community, but we don't necessarily know each other. But there's
Mhm.
a camaraderie that happens when you're on that floor, right? Or when you're not even on the floor, you're in the line to try to get into the club.
Okay, for
And there's
sure.
right there's a sort of a singular purpose of connection, movement, expression. And I think that that has a story that we can all take away from and lessons that we can all take away from in terms of movement building.
Yeah.
Because as you're saying, investing 6 to 8 hours of being in a space and building a level of trust and sharing stories spoken and unspoken through movement, through words, and things that we don't necessarily see. And then how can we learn from that? So even in my mind, I'm thinking, how can the business world learn from house music and
Mm.
creators of house music and curators like yourself?
Mhm.
Because there is some structure, but there is also flexibility. There is a sense of unspoken policy norms and values that happen within particular spaces, what as it relates to being in sort of in a house music space. And so there's something that I know for myself that from our conversation, I'm going to take away from it. And very quickly, if you have another 2 minutes, I want to wrap up here with this question because I think it's important, again, to come back to, for all of us who are striving to bring our voices, our contributions and energies and lived experiences from what I consider the periphery into the center,
Mm.
how
Mm.
can we draw on house music to generate transformative stories that we can share across borders and realities? And certainly from your experience and breadth of knowledge, I would imagine that, you could give us some savory thoughts and ideas around that.
Yeah. Well, it kind of takes me back to the beginning because, house music had a certain look, right? So there was a way of dressing if you were into house music that you could see somebody walking across the street and you would know if they were house, right? And so while those days don't exist, I think the attitude of that is that you can almost tell if somebody is down or not, like cool or not. Like, I'm using these words, but all I mean is, are you a humanitarian?
Yeah.
Like, and I would say literally that is what we, strive to create these spaces for love, for respect, unity, community. We were doing all of that. Like, one of the reasons why house music and hip hop split off, they kind of start in a similar place. They're
Yeah.
sampling disco breaks and dancing to that. A lot of early hip hop tunes are house music tunes, and we're playing those same songs in the parties. And people are breakdancing and beatboxing as well on, on the same house music dance floors. They're all the same in the very beginning. They end up splitting because one faction became very homophobic, you know,
Hmm.
um, clinging to this persona of bravado and machoism and violence, even. And so house music had to split from that because again, we're kids from the civil rights era and we want peace and love and respect and justice. And so that those ideals did not fit into our ideals. And so if you're talking about people on the margins, which we all were, but if you co-opt the colonizer's mindset, then you might think about, you have to do all of this other stuff to be somebody.
Hmm.
Whereas we were like, we're enough as we are. We are
Yeah.
everything. We don't
Yeah.
need anybody. So house music does offer a blueprint for that because the margins are where all the innovation happened.
Yes. Yeah.
That's where we, is born all the way outside of any sort of mainstream validation. So we were creating, and there we did not have a roadmap for that. So it also encourages you, to just be yourself. Just be
Yes.
yourself. That is a huge thing in house music. Like, nobody can tell you how to be you, so just be you, right? And um, the other thing I guess I would say is, repetition is so important in that. Repetition builds a narrative. When you come to a party and it's a good party, and if they can recreate that over and over again, right? So it's not so iffy, it's consistent, you know what to expect, you're going to go back. And, thank God for, the warehouse, really, because people had such a good time week after week, even though the club itself wasn't there that long. The masterful way in which Frankie Knuckles approached this musical experience and the time and care he took to master and craft this beautiful, he wove these songs together in such a mm, chef's kiss. He was about that experience of, I want to be consistently great for folks when they come through the door. He refused to dial it in. He refused to wear his emotions on his sleeve. He gave the people what they wanted and what they needed. And so I think that, that repetition built such a narrative, and that's why people still talk about this club today. Fewer than 200 people could go in at a time, really. And yet it's such a huge part of the folklore because people cannot forget those experiences. So when you tell those stories through your rhythm, your dance, your lyrics, whatever you choose to play, and what's going to stick with folks, that consistency, that it required no translation. It was just people understood. Um, yeah, I think that, if you're talking about what's the periphery, what's the center, you're good enough. You don't need anybody's permission, and I think, preserve that lineage, just keep thinking about what did people have to go through when they couldn't live out and proud, and um, you know, remember that as you think about what kind of spaces you're going to make, and kind of center, like almost walking in their shoes. And so when you
Yeah.
do that, I think you're going to mostly get it right, right? You're going to be having that in mind at every choice or decision that you have to make. So, um, culture is the thing. It's not, sort of performative. It's not a decoration that you can take up and take down. It's
Mhm.
really thinking about who am I talking to and what do they need from me? And so giving them that. I think that's it. You just kind of center who you want at the center. I think we see that in every way and every day. Like Met Gala is Met Gala for folks that it needs to Met Gala for.
Yeah. Yeah, I
and,
hear exactly what you're saying.
and for nobody else, okay? They are not trying
Exactly.
to, lessen it or make it something for everybody. It's for a very specific set. And so know who you're talking to and design for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that that's, as we close today, I think that that is one of the most important messages is about the attention to your audience. And it's the attention that we are enough. So if you're a member of a historically marginalized community, while you organize and build movements, knowing that hopefully that you know that you're not alone, that we operate transnationally, that these community, I'm talking to you from Toronto, you're talking to me from Chicago. No amount of energy that people are going to expend to tell us we're not good enough. We know we are here and we have power, and we have power to transform in our communications and our connections. And I am forever grateful and thankful for you, the work that you do, the transformations that you create in your mixing that are publicly available on YouTube. And I feel very privileged that and honored that I had an opportunity to hear your music, to dance, and to feel connected over and over again in different spaces. Although it's not been in person, I hope that one day that will happen.
Yeah.
Yes, but I'm appreciative of the care that you give, and the influences that you have, and how you use that influence to really bring other people with you and establish a space of trust and a belief in self, and that balm that we all need right now, um, to come out to the other side and be whole.
And
So
we will be whole. We will be.
yes,
Yeah. Thank you so much.
so
That was
thank
so
you.
nice of you to say. Thank you.
You're so welcome. And with that, I will wrap the interview
Okay.
part. And I just want to thank you so much again. Until next time, remember to connect, share, engage, and transform.
Somewhere